I stood in the hallway of my son's house, holding a tray of sweet potatoes I'd baked from scratch. When I looked up, I saw the family photo they had framed above the mantel. Everyone was there. My son, his wife, my grandkids, even the dog. But not me. Not the woman who helped raise them, who gave up her savings for their home, who never missed a birthday. They took that photo while I was home knitting sweaters. For them. That was the moment I knew. They'd already erased me. So I picked up a pen, and quietly erased them from something too. My name is Eleanor Mayfield, and I'm 74 years old. I have a silver streak through my dark hair now, and hands that ache when the weather turns. I drink my coffee black, with a little honey stirred in, and I still wear my late husband's cardigan around the house. Not because I'm cold, but because the smell of cedar and aftershave still clings to the threads. Robert's been gone 8 years. And in those 8 years, I've kept myself busy. Baking, gardening, volunteering at the church, and knitting. Mostly knitting. I like how yarn loops into something warm and whole, stitch by stitch. If only people worked that way too. I raised one son. Just one. David. He was my miracle baby after 2 miscarriages. I poured everything into him. Every dime, every minute, every ounce of patience. His father and I weren't wealthy, but we were steady. We worked hard. We sacrificed. When David married Lynn, I was so thrilled. She was charming, bright-eyed, ambitious. I thought, finally, he has someone to love him like I always have. But over time, that charm turned thin. She wanted bigger houses, fancier cars, and distance. Especially from me. Still I gave. I sold my small cottage and moved into the in-law unit behind their big home when David lost his job. I told everyone it was to be closer to the grandkids. But truthfully, it was to help pay their mortgage. I used the money from my home sale to keep them afloat. And they promised to take care of me. I watched their children after school. I made meals when Lynn had long days. I sewed costumes for school plays and taught my granddaughter, Emma, how to braid her hair. But slowly, the invites started disappearing. No more family dinners. No more holidays hosted by all of us. And then that day, the photo. It was Thanksgiving morning, 2 years ago. I was in the kitchen early, sleeves rolled, humming Blue Skies while kneading dough. The smell of yeast and cinnamon filled the room. I'd made my famous pecan rolls, the ones David used to beg for every Christmas growing up. I heard laughter outside, so I looked through the blinds. There they were in the garden. A photographer. A tripod. Coordinated outfits. Lynn, brushing Emma's hair. David, adjusting his tie. They posed under the oak tree I planted the year they moved in. The whole family. Except me. I wasn't even asked. No one said a word about it when they came inside. Not a single glance my way. They ate the rolls. Complimented the turkey. Talked about the weather. But when I walked through the hallway and saw that 8x10 frame mounted above the fireplace, the smiles, the matching outfits, the warm tones, I felt a kind of cold I'd never known. Not sadness. Erasure. I stood there, staring at that photo, while Emma tugged my hand. Grandma, that's our new Christmas card. Mommy said you'd love it. I smiled and said, "It's beautiful, sweetheart." My voice barely made it out of my throat. Later that night, I sat in my tiny unit behind the house, alone with a mug of sleepy-time tea and a slice of leftover pie. I looked around, at the bookshelf filled with their school photos, the sock drawer filled with tiny knitted things, the glass cabinet with my wedding china I gave Lynn as a gift she never used. And I said aloud to no one, "I think I've been quietly disappearing for years." That winter was colder than most. The kids stopped coming by after school. David stopped knocking to check on me. And then one day in spring, I got a call from my friend Margaret, the kind of friend who still sends handwritten letters and brings lavender cookies when she visits. "Elle," she said gently, "I heard something at the garden club. I wasn't going to say anything, but Lynn told someone you'd be moving into assisted living soon. Is that true? I dropped my knitting needles. No. I've never even mentioned it. Margaret paused. Well, she said your memory's been slipping. That you need more care. I didn't believe it, of course. But, Elle, is there something going on? I laughed, but it came out hollow. That night, I pulled out my bank ledger. I had been so trusting, so passive. I realized I hadn't checked the details of my savings in months. David had access, ever since Robert passed. He said he'd handle the online stuff, since I struggled with tech. But now I looked. And what I found chilled me more than any photo omission ever could. $3,200 monthly withdrawals. Regular as clockwork. Labeled as care services. Except, I had no care services. My health was fine. My memory sharp. I cooked, cleaned, even drove. I stared at the screen, my hands trembling. They weren't just erasing me from memories. They were preparing to erase me from my life. I didn't cry that night. Not anymore. I printed every statement. I made a folder. And I called Margaret back. She picked me up the next day and drove me to her cousin's law office downtown. Helen Avery. Estate and Elder Law. Helen was direct, kind, and didn't sugarcoat a thing. After reviewing my documents, she leaned forward. Mrs. Mayfield, you're not alone. Unfortunately, I've seen this before. What we need to do now is protect you. I felt like someone had finally thrown me a life preserver. We closed the joint accounts. We moved my assets into a protected trust. We drafted a new will. And in it, I left David and Lynn nothing. Not the house. Not the investments. Not the silver I inherited from my mother. Instead, I created a scholarship fund for older women returning to school. And I named Margaret the executor. But I wasn't done. I waited until Mother's Day. Lynn always hosted it with flair. Brunches, gifts, performances by the grandkids. I arrived, wearing my nicest shawl, gift in hand. I sat through the toasts. I clapped at the poems. I hugged the children. And at the end, when Lynn passed me a gift bag with bath salts and a candle, I said, "Thank you, dear. I have something for you too." I handed her a white envelope. David opened his identical one at the same time. Their faces drained as they read, "Effective immediately, you are no longer beneficiaries of my estate. Please direct all further inquiries to my legal counsel." There was a pause. Then David stood up, his face red. "What is this? A joke?" I stood, calm as stone. "No joke. Just clarity." Lynn looked ready to spit venom. "You ungrateful. After everything we've done." I tilted my head. "Done for me? Or to me?" Neither replied. I walked out, slowly but proudly. My heart didn't ache this time. It beat steady. Strong. The air outside was cool when I stepped off their porch, but inside me, something had shifted. For the first time in years, I wasn't just someone's grandmother or someone's mother. I was me again. Eleanor Mayfield, widow of Robert, retired teacher, lover of books, knitter of scarves, and apparently, survivor of betrayal. I walked down the driveway slowly that Mother's Day afternoon. Behind me, I could still hear the muffled shock from the house. David's raised voice, Lynn's sharp tone like the crack of glass. But it all seemed so distant. I felt oddly calm. Not triumphant. Just grounded. Like a woman who had finally stepped into her own shadow and realized it belonged only to her. Margaret was waiting at the curb in her old blue Buick. She didn't ask questions. Just looked at me with those gentle knowing eyes and said, "Ready?" I nodded. More than I've ever been. We drove across town, past the florist where Robert used to buy me daisies, past the library I spent 25 years working in, and past the community garden where I taught Ava how to plant tulips. My life had been scattered in pieces across this town like seeds in the wind. Now, I was gathering them back. Margaret had helped me rent a small cottage on the east side of town. Nothing grand, but it had a front porch, creaky wooden floors, and a bedroom with sunlight that spilled across the walls like honey. It even had a little attic for my yarn and sewing things. I walked in for the first time, carrying nothing but a suitcase, a quilt I'd made decades ago, and the last jar of blackberry jam Robert and I had canned together. There were no framed family photos on the walls here. Just quiet. And I realized how much I had missed it. The first few days were hard. I won't lie. I kept reaching for the kettle where it used to be. I woke up expecting Emma's knock on the door after school. And I cried. Yes, of course I cried. The ache of disappointment is still an ache, even when it comes from clarity. But that space became my own sanctuary. I began to fill it with small intentional joys. A yellow chair by the window. An ivy plant named Hope. A tea shelf with all my favorites. Hibiscus, chamomile, and Earl Grey. Each morning, I wrote in a little leather-bound journal Helen had gifted me. You are not a burden. You are not invisible. You are not disposable. I wrote it over and over until I believed it. About 2 weeks after I moved, I received a letter in the mail. Handwritten. Sloppy, rushed. It was from David. Mom, I don't understand what's happening. I'm hurt. You blindsided us. Whatever this is, can't we fix it? Talk about it like a family? David, no apology. No mention of the money. No explanation for the lies Lynn told. Just confusion and guilt, wrapped in a ribbon of entitlement. I placed the letter on my desk and didn't reply. I didn't owe him my silence anymore, but I didn't owe him my energy either. A few days later, Lynn texted. I think we've all said things we didn't mean. The kids miss you. Can we meet? Funny, I thought. I hadn't said anything at all. Not until I'd made it legal. I ignored it. Not because I wanted revenge, but because I'd spent too long answering calls that only drained me. Instead, I called Margaret. Want to come over for lemon pie and secrets? I asked. She laughed. I'm bringing wine and my gossip ears. That night, under soft lamps and laughter, I told her everything. From the joint account to the fake memory stories Lynn had told people. From the photo that cut me out to the months I pretended not to notice I was fading. Margaret took my hand. You're brave, Elle. But you shouldn't have had to be. You're not the one who broke trust. I know, I said, surprising even myself with the steadiness in my voice. The next morning, I visited Helen, my lawyer, again. This time not to fix anything, but to prepare for what I knew was coming. I want to write a letter, I told her. Not to them. To myself. And I want it in the trust. She nodded. What do you want it to say? I smiled. That I chose peace. That when no one chose me, I did. She slid a notebook across the desk. Start here. Weeks turned to months. I built a routine. Mornings were for tea, walks to the bookstore, and conversations with the neighborhood cat, Mr. Pickles. Afternoons, I volunteered at the community center, teaching young girls how to knit, bake, and use their voices. Evenings, I'd sit on the porch with my journal and write about everything I'd learned too late, and everything I was still discovering. One day, a knock came at the door. It was Emma, my youngest grandchild. The only one who ever really noticed when I disappeared from a room. She stood on the porch, fidgeting with her sleeves. Hi, Grandma. I blinked back 1,000 things I wanted to say. Hi, sweetheart. Come in. She stepped into the kitchen like it was a dream. I didn't know you lived here, she whispered. I do now. We sat at the table. I poured her lemonade. She looked older. Maybe it was just the sadness behind her eyes. Mom and Dad said you moved because you were sick. I bit my lip. I moved because I needed to remember who I was. Before I forgot completely. Emma looked down. I miss your scarf days. I smiled. I still make them. Want one? She nodded, tears in her eyes. I gave her a pink one from the basket. Before she left, she hugged me tight and whispered, I'm sorry I didn't ask about the photo. I noticed you weren't in it. I held her for a long time. It's okay, baby. You just gave me back something they took away. She tilted her head. What? My voice. After that, the calls from David stopped. The texts dried up. The silence wasn't cruel anymore. It was chosen. Mine. I was free. Not just legally. Not just financially. But spiritually. I stopped explaining myself to people who never listened. I stopped offering gifts where I wasn't welcome. And I stopped shrinking to make others comfortable. The last time I saw David and Lynn was in town. Months later, at the grocery store. Lynn looked me up and down. I see you're doing fine, she said with that tone of hers. I met her eyes. I'm doing better than fine. I'm doing right by myself. David opened his mouth, but I raised a hand. You made your choices. And I finally made mine. That's all there is to it. And I turned, groceries in hand, and walked away. That night, I wrote the final line in my journal. Sometimes the most radical thing a woman can do is choose herself. And I knew I would never be cut out again. Because I had finally put myself in the frame. 2 months after I walked away from David and Lynn in that grocery store aisle, a certified envelope arrived at my door. I recognized the logo before I even opened it. Preston and Hale, Family Law, David's attorney. I stared at it for a moment, fingers resting on the sealed flap. The last time I'd held a letter with this much weight, it was Robert's will. That had been love wrapped in paper. This was something colder. I sat at the kitchen table, poured myself a cup of black tea, and gently peeled it open. The letter inside was formal. Sterile. Full of phrases like deep disappointment, unlawful manipulation, and requests for reconsideration of inheritance terms. They were contesting my will. Imagine that. My son was suing me for changing a will I had written with my own 2 hands. At the end of the letter was a demand to meet and resolve the matter amicably before further legal steps are pursued. I laughed. Not a bitter laugh. A sad one. After everything. This was the moment David found his urgency? He hadn't noticed I was gone. Not really. He hadn't asked where I went when I stopped showing up to birthday parties, when my seat at Thanksgiving was empty, or when his children stopped receiving hand-knit gifts at Christmas. But the minute my signature cost him money, he came running. I called Helen. She wasn't surprised. He's bluffing, she said. They almost always do. But if you'd like, we can meet them, with a witness present. Let them speak their truth, and you'll speak yours. I agreed. Not because I needed closure, but because I needed clarity. And I wanted to say out loud what I had learned in the quiet. We met at a neutral office space downtown. A sterile conference room with too much beige and chairs that tried too hard to be ergonomic. David walked in first, looking exhausted. Lynn followed, her lips painted a deep red, her heels clicking like punctuation on every silent accusation. I stood when they entered. Old habit. Still polite. Still strong. Helen sat beside me, flipping through her folder, her reading glasses perched low on her nose. David cleared his throat. Mom! Mrs. Mayfield, Helen interrupted gently. Let's keep this professional. He blinked. Lynn scoffed. David looked at me again. I just want to understand why. Why would you change everything without talking to us? We could have fixed whatever was wrong. I folded my hands. You mean like how you fixed the $3,200 that disappeared from my account every month? Or the rumors that I was mentally unwell? Or the family photo you took and framed without me? David flinched. Lynn leaned forward. That money was for household needs. Things you benefited from too. Helen slid a paper across the table. Receipts show otherwise. Private spa visits, luxury purchases, and weekly meal delivery services. None of which went to Mrs. Mayfield. David shook his head. This is ridiculous. We took care of you. I finally spoke, soft but steady. You took advantage of me. They fell silent. I reached into my bag and pulled out a photograph. Not of them. Not of me. It was of Robert. Taken in 1984. He was in the garden, holding David in his arms, a smile wide enough to split the sky. Behind him was the small house we built with savings and sweat. I set the photo down in front of David. You see this man? I said. He taught me what legacy means. And he didn't leave me behind when I got older. He didn't silence me when I cried. He held me, David. He held all of us. Tears welled in my eyes, but I let them fall freely. You stopped holding space for me years ago. David didn't look at the photo. But Lynn did. Her expression hardened. So what now, she said. You just throw your family away? I stood. No, I replied. I finally stopped letting my family throw me away. I turned to Helen. We're done here. And we walked out. That night, I lit a candle for Robert. It was something I hadn't done in years. I used to think doing so kept me tied to grief. But now I realized, it tied me to memory. And to meaning. I sat on the porch and told him everything. How I'd let guilt chain me to people who only wanted my warmth when it suited them. How I'd almost gone to my grave waiting for someone else to value me. And how, finally, I had learned that love is not proven by sacrifice. It's proven by respect. Weeks passed. Emma visited again. She brought a little journal she had started. It's for you to read, she said. I call it Things My Grandma Taught Me. I flipped through it slowly, heart full. Page 1. You don't have to say yes to everything. Page 2. People who love you should never make you feel small. Page 3. Grandmas deserve boundaries too. I hugged her, tighter than ever. She asked me something I hadn't expected. Can I come live with you for a while? Just weekends? I paused. Did your parents say that was okay? She shrugged. They don't even talk to me anymore about you. They say you're confused. But I'm not. I nodded slowly. We'll find a way, sweetheart. Even if it's just time together at the library. She smiled. As long as it's real time. I spent the next months giving more of that. Real time. To myself. To the girls at the community center. To Emma. To walks through the park. To afternoons with jazz records. To cups of tea shared with neighbors who saw me. People began calling me Miss Eleanor again. Like I had an identity of my own, not tied to anyone else's name. One of the girls at the center, Jasmine, asked if I would be her honorary grandmother at graduation. She was 17. A poet. Fierce. Abandoned by her own family at 12. I said yes. She made me a paper flower bouquet with my name in the center. Eleanor. Not Mom. Not Grandma. Just me. And for the first time in decades, that was enough. By summer, I received a final letter from David's lawyer. They were dropping the contest. No further action. I smiled as I read it. The will would stand. Because I would stand. Because I had remembered what David and Lynn had forgotten. That the matriarch is the foundation of the family tree. And when you poison the roots, the branches don't flourish. By the time fall returned to our little town, the maples outside my cottage had turned the color of fire. The wind carried that soft whisper of change. Crisp, not cold. It was the kind of season Robert used to call a second spring, when every leaf is a flower. And just like the trees, I felt like I was finally shedding the dead weight of old seasons. Slowly, gently, but completely. I had learned to enjoy silence again. Not the silence of neglect. That's the kind that bruises. But the silence of peace. Of a room filled only with the scent of apple pie and the hum of an old jazz tune on vinyl. The kind of silence where you're not waiting for a knock that never comes. I'd stopped waiting. One morning, I decided to reopen my garden beds. My cottage had a small patch of earth out back, and though it had been neglected for years before I arrived, the soil was good. Rich. Quietly waiting. Much like me. I brought out my gloves, the trowel, a few seed packets I'd picked up from the town market. Daisies, tomatoes, even some lavender for the bees. As I dug into the soil, something shifted in me. It had been years since I gardened with joy. The last time, I'd planted tulips with Emma. Back when she was just a little thing with mismatched barrettes and a bucket full of questions. And I remembered something she'd asked me then, while pressing seeds into the soil. Grandma, if we bury them, how do they know to grow up and not down? I had smiled and said, because that's what they were made for, baby. To reach for the sun. Funny. Now I knew that answer was meant for me too. I was tending to the lavender bed, sweat on my brow, when I heard footsteps on the gravel path. I stood slowly, brushing off my knees. It was Emma. But she wasn't alone. Behind her stood my sister, Janice. I hadn't seen her in nearly 7 years. Not since Robert's funeral. She'd moved across the country, into a retirement village, and our calls had grown few and far between. Life had gotten in the way. Old wounds had grown moss. We drifted. But there she was, in a navy coat and burgundy scarf, her silver curls pinned up the same way Mama used to wear hers on Sundays. Ellie, she said softly. You look good. I blinked, startled. Jan. Emma piped up, grinning. Surprise. I dropped my trowel and hugged my sister so tight it hurt my shoulders. When we finally pulled apart, Janice chuckled. That garden's not the only thing still growing. We laughed until we cried. That afternoon, the 3 of us sat on the porch, me, Emma, and Janice, eating slices of pecan pie and sipping cinnamon tea. Janice reached for my hand. I'm sorry I was gone so long. I should have checked on you. After Robert. And then after all this. I shook my head. We both went quiet. That's the trouble with grief, isn't it? It convinces you to fold inward. Janice nodded. But look at you now. You unfolded. I smiled. It took time. But I did. Emma sat between us, drawing a sketch of the house in her little notebook. She'd grown so much in the last year. Taller, sharper in mind, and softer in heart. You know what I think, she said. We both turned to her. You're the strong one in the family. Not Dad. Not Mom. You. I touched her cheek. Strength doesn't always look like shouting, baby. Sometimes it's knowing when to walk away. Later that evening, after Emma left to go home, Janice helped me clear dishes in the kitchen. I heard what David tried to do, she said quietly. Unforgivable. It was cruel, I replied. But I let it happen. 4 years, January. I gave and thought if I just loved harder, they'd see me. And they didn't. I shook my head. Not until I said no. She put a dish down. Ellie, would you ever consider coming to live with me? I paused. She rushed to explain. Not forever. Just, well, my house has space. We could start over. Knit again. You could teach that nosy neighbor of mine how to make actual tea. I laughed. It was tempting. But I looked around the cottage, the walls I had painted, the ivy growing in the corner, the stack of letters I was writing to myself. This is mine, January. For the first time in decades. I have a space that's mine. She nodded. Then I'll visit more often. 2 weeks later, I attended Emma's school play. She was playing the role of a narrator in a story about the seasons. How change comes whether we want it to or not, and how every season leaves something behind for the next. Afterward, she ran to me backstage, costume slipping from her shoulder, cheeks flushed. "Did you like it, Grandma?" I hugged her. "You were the best part of the whole show." She dug into her pocket and pulled out a folded sheet. "What's this?" She beamed. "A poem I wrote. We had to write about someone who makes us feel safe." I unfolded it, breath catching as I read. "When the world gets loud, she is a quiet bench under trees. When I feel small, her voice tells me I matter. She is hands that plant and heal. She is the reason I believe you can start over, even when you're old." I looked up, and Emma's eyes were full of hope. "You think it's okay I said old?" I laughed, wiping tears. "Baby, old is a privilege. And if starting over was a superpower, I'd be flying." That night, I sat on the porch again, candle flickering beside me. And I realized something. This story, my story, was never about revenge. It was about remembering. Remembering who I am. Remembering that no one gets to define your worth. Not your family, not your bank account, not your age. It's you. You decide when to begin again. You decide which stories deserve to be framed. And you decide who deserves to sit at your table. I chose peace. I chose me. And the garden? It's still growing. The day I updated the title on my cottage deed, the notary asked me if I wanted to add a successor, someone to inherit it when I passed. Without hesitation, I said, "Yes." She looked up, pen poised. "Name?" I smiled. "Emma Grace Mayfield." She blinked. "Your granddaughter?" I nodded. "She remembers me." And that, after all, is what legacy really means. I didn't tell David or Lynn. I didn't need to. Letting them know what they lost had never been the point. Living fully without their shadows over me. That was the victory. Besides, the world has a quiet way of showing people what they threw away. And David? He was seeing it. Word had gotten around. Small towns have big ears, that they had tried to manipulate an elderly parent. That I had donated a large sum to the women's shelter in Robert's name. That I had established a scholarship for single mothers. That I had started over. And didn't look back. And people noticed. The same way people notice when a garden blooms where they expected rot. One Sunday morning, I received a knock at the door. It wasn't Emma. It was Lynn. She stood on my porch wearing sunglasses, a tight blazer, and an expression that looked like it had practiced sympathy but forgot sincerity. "I was in the neighborhood," she said flatly. "Thought we could talk." I tilted my head. "You were never just in the neighborhood, Lynn." She forced a laugh. "Can I come in?" I looked past her, at the sunlight streaming through the trees behind her. At my lavender blooming. At my life that no longer bent for hers. "No, thank you. I'm not accepting guests today." Her face hardened. "You know, David's been depressed. He says he hasn't heard from you in months." I nodded. "That's true." Her voice dipped to a whisper. "Do you think Emma should be around someone so unpredictable?" I didn't flinch. "Not this time." "You mean someone who doesn't let people steal from her? Who sets boundaries? Who stopped pretending that guilt and love are the same thing?" She looked stunned. As if the Eleanor she remembered had vanished. And she was right. That version of me was gone. I closed the door gently. Not in anger but in finality. Emma visited the next day, holding a binder of her college plans. She wanted to study education, like Grandma used to before retirement. "I want to be the kind of teacher who tells kids the truth," she said. "That they matter. Even if no one at home tells them." I handed her an envelope. Inside it, a letter of recommendation, written in longhand. And behind that, a check. Not too much. Not to spoil her. But enough to show her I believed in her. "This is from the woman they once tried to erase," I told her. Now she signs checks with her full name and no hesitation. Emma hugged me tightly. "You're not just my grandma," she said. "You're the woman I want to become." A month later, I got a letter in the mail. This time, not from a lawyer. It was from one of the girls at the community center. Jasmine, the poet. It read, "You told me a woman doesn't have to stay where she isn't seen. You told me love without respect is just controlling costume. You told me I wasn't broken, just buried. Thank you for helping me bloom." I placed the letter in a little wooden box by my bedside, next to Robert's watch, Emma's first drawing, and a photo of me on my porch, holding a mug that says, "She remembered who she was, and the game changed." That fall, I hosted Thanksgiving at my cottage. Not because I missed tradition, but because I finally knew who deserved a seat at my table. Janice came. Emma brought 2 friends from school. Margaret brought her famously dry cornbread and 3 bottles of wine. Even Jasmine stopped by for dessert. We didn't have matching outfits or professional portraits. But we had laughter. And second helpings. And eyes that met mine when I spoke. No one asked me to take the photo. But this time I was in it. Smiling. Centered. Framed. When everyone left and the dishes were done, I stepped out into the night air, wrapped in my shawl, and looked up at the stars. I whispered something to Robert. "Darling, I finally got it right." Because I had. They didn't cut me out. I walked out. And I never looked back.